Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Kneon. I'm not here with Geeky Sparkles in this video, but we're going to talk about Apple and Patreon and a 30% price hike. The Apple tax. Yeah, apparently Patreon is no longer immune to the Apple tax, and it turns out that if you're going to back your favorite creator via Patreon, you're going to pay 30% more if you're doing it through an Apple device, if you're doing it through an in-app purchase. And I think it's hot trash. I do. So we're gonna talk about the backlash over this, and I really got to rethink things, guys. It's so weird because we started a Patreon, right? And I've been very, very critical of Patreon, but we started one a couple of months ago, and the reason we did it is a lot of those censors that they had at Patreon, well, they're gone. And actually, other people have been putting up some pretty dicey content on Patreon with no issue. So I'm like, well, maybe it's safe to use Patreon. That is the brand, right? Everybody knows Patreon before they know, Subscribestar or Locals or any of that kind of stuff. So I'm like, yeah, we'll do it. And you guys have been great. We've had some support on there. I haven't been pushing as hard as I probably should, but I don't want to seem like I'm begging all the time. A lot of people, they got that tin cup out. They're constantly rattling it, and it's like, no, I'd rather save that for when we really, really need it or whatever. But I got to rethink it now. I really got to rethink this now. I'm not sure what to do, because there's all kinds of backlash over this. So let's talk about this before we get into it any further. Please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, guys. No woohoos. We're going to talk about Patreon and Apple, and Apple getting the backlash, Patreon saying that they tried to avoid it. I know when I logged in today, it's like, hey, do you want to pass the buck to your backers, or do you want to eat the fees yourself, or what do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't want either one. Why do I have to choose? And Patreon got in trouble for this before because they were trying to make creators eat the fees or pass it on to their users, their own processing fees. Now we have Apple taking this cut. And it's the same thing with the YouTube subscriptions too. One of the reasons we don't do the subscriptions through the main channel, we do it on the gaming channel, but we don't do it on the main channels because YouTube takes 30%. Like, there's no way to avoid it, right? Like, your favorite creators are not getting all of the money. They're just not. This is coming from Creative Block. Apple's 30% cut of in-app transactions has caused consternation in the tech world for a while, with the likes of Epic Games and Spotify launching high-profile legal battles with the company. The latest victim of the Apple tax is Patreon, but this is just one example that could have serious repercussions for creatives. Patreon has explained to its users that Face is being removed from the Apple App Store if it does not switch subscriptions over to the iOS in-app model, which means Apple taking said cut. And I noticed that this happened with me with Clip Studio. Clip Studio costs a lot more now than it used to because of the Apple tax. Creators will therefore face the choice of whether to up their fees to account for the deduction or swallow the cost themselves. Unfortunately, Apple is requiring us to switch over to their in-app purchase system for all iOS transactions, or else risk being kicked out of the App Store altogether, and their in-app purchase system is not built with our same level of creator-first flexibility. That's what happens when you're the largest platform in the US, I believe, for phones. I looked into it before. Android worldwide has more, a larger install base. More people have Android phones, but in the US, it's Apple. They said the update is a partner forcing us into a change we don't believe is best for creators. They said in the past, the question of Apple's immovable fees has felt confined to the realms of tech giants. It's hard to feel sympathy for the creator of Fortnite or the world's biggest music streaming platform, but with creators now facing the prospect of giving a large slice of their earnings to Apple, the policy is suddenly starting to look a little more mean-spirited. Tim Sweeney here says it's not just Patreon, it's sweeping across the ecosystem. Let's see here. Let's go out and see some of the responses. This was the post I saw it on originally before I logged into Patreon and got hit with that. Straub says in November, they're going to start charging an App Store 30% fee on top of the regular membership prices for new signups on iPhones. Creators do not see any of this money. It goes directly to Apple. Please don't spend extra money. Join via web or Android. I think what's going to happen, unfortunately, though, is that a lot of people are going to stop using Patreon altogether. They're going to see that 30% increase and be like, yeah, I'm not doing it. It's like, especially in this economy, right? It's hard to get people to support you because they're feeling generous. When they can't afford food, when people are getting laid off in droves. I mean, it's kind of douchey to ask somebody to fork over, hey, you got an extra, $20, $30 a month laying around, $10 a month laying around, whatever you got, man, whatever you got, I'll take it. Oh, and also here, an extra $3 to $5 processing fee for Apple, because Apple's so broke, they need your money too. Wow, so crazy. So here are some of the responses. It's not quite right. Apple will start taking a 30% cut of new memberships. If the Patreon creators don't change anything, then the price will stay the same, but they will make 30% less money because Apple will just take it. However, Patreon is allowing creators to set a different price for iPhone memberships, which will of course be higher just to absorb the iPhone fee. So in a way, it's almost worse, because if creators don't set up a separate pricing tier, they will simply make less money. Thanks for spreading awareness. This shit is gross, says Griebach, Digital Vampire Souls tuber. This is crazy. Straub says it's the opposite. Yeah, new patrons signing up are eating the cost of the 30% markup. I know I had the option when I logged in. They're like, you can either pass the buck or absorb it. Either way sucks, right? Because if it's too high, nobody's going to back you. And the alternative is you make 30% less money. Johan says, I refuse to use the app, but that's the easiest thing for most people, especially if you're doing podcasts. Most people are going to use it on their phones because then they can listen to the podcast on their phones. I'm just saying that's how it is. I think if you look, I think you're going to see the vast majority of Patreon users, especially for podcasts, which are like it's the most popular thing on the platform. They're probably using their phones to do it, if I had to guess. If I'm already pledged, do I have to resubscribe via the website? If you're already pledged, you're fine. New subscriptions only for now. Got the email today, F Apple. Never knew there was an app. Always used the web version. Maybe it's time for Ko-fi or coffee or whatever. Common Apple L. So dumb, how can they get away with blatant robbery? Because they're Apple. And they're huge. And they're flush with cash. Apple's one of the few companies out there that I don't think they have any debt. I think they're just like sitting on like $1 trillion or something, just like sitting in some offshore bank account. I don't know. They're ridiculously wealthy. Stop giving Apple money. They're the most trash anti-consumer company in existence. I remember when hipsters loved Apple. Do you remember that? Like if you were an Apple supporter, you were counterculture. I was all into Apple in the 90s and early 2000s. Like you could not part me from my iMacs, my Macintosh, my PowerBook. You couldn't pry them out of my hands. That's all I used. And that was like part of my personality. I had the damn sticker in the back of my window on my one car. I was an Apple guy. I shopped at the one computer store in town that sold Apple. And then when the Apple store opened, I went there and I got the iPhones and they came out, all that. And now I'm like, fuck Apple. I don't really give a shit, But yeah, it was like the counterculture thing. Apple was, think different. Yeah, their computers cost more, but they were sort of artisanal, and serious artists used Apple because you're sticking it to the man. And back then the man was Bill Gates. It was Windows. And now it's Apple. Apple has become the man. I got a different email from Patreon. It says Venus RR Valise. Bill all at the first of the month method. You're currently on a first of the month billing model, but Apple's in-app purchase system only supports subscription billing. Apple has made clear that if creators on Patreon continue to use unsupported billing models or disable transactions in the iOS app, we will be at risk of having the entire app removed from the App Store. God, this is insane. They're also forcing people to switch to the pay the day you sub method, which is going to fuck over a lot of people who rely on the first of the month payments for budgeting and bills. Creators fought against this back in 2021. Yeah, this actually happened a couple of years ago. And this is another reason why we were very hesitant to use Patreon, because of between the censorship and this crap that they were trying to pass the buck onto creators and backers were like, yeah, Patreon's not really a safe place to go. But I thought they changed their ways, and I think they have. But Apple is going to force them to do this. Apple Inc. was dealt a blow Friday when a federal judge in the Epic Games case issued an injunction. This is 2021. Said the company no longer forced developers to use the payment system. I thought it wasn't allowed. Yeah, it was an injunction. I think they got it figured out, and they can. They absolutely can. Because it's not just Patreon. I've noticed other subscriptions have gone up too. 30% tax for using a mobile app is retarded. Yeah, I believe it is. I think it's incredibly stupid. I think they do the same thing with Twitter though too. For premium, if you use the Apple Store, I'm pretty sure you have to pay more. But people are not happy about it. I think it's going to hurt. I think it's going to hurt Patreon. They said up until this year, this is coming from The Verge, they said up until this year, Patreon has been allowed to skirt Apple's 30% commission by using alternative payment processors. 2021, Patreon CEO Jack Conte said during an interview with Decoder that it doesn't have some special contract with Apple, and the company had to deal with the App Store policies and review processes just like anyone else. He said Apple may have given Patreon a pass because users don't come to Patreon to discover creators and content. But last year, Patreon announced it would have to make the switch to Apple's payment in-app system, with Apple's 30% commission on digital goods going into effect the beginning of 2024. Apple is going to extend the fee to new memberships and subscriptions later in the year. Okay. Patreon said Apple would extend the fee to new memberships and subscriptions later in the year. Yeah, so the comments are not good. Great to hear that Patreon will finally begin paying their fair share to contribute to the upkeep of the platform that clearly provides them an incredible amount of value. What? Apple's evil. Why does Patreon need an app? If they get value from the exposure, they should pay up. Actually, the way Patreon works is kind of like Kickstarter for the most part, where it's your audience. These platforms are making money off of your audience. And I don't know what to do. I really don't know what to do. They said, yeah, the 30% is basically a protection racket. Pay us or bad things will happen to your business. So it's, I don't know. I don't know what to do here, guys. I think that this is not a good idea, Patreon, and I thought it was safe to go back in the water, and it's not. We have the donor box set up, which is great, except that is pivoting more to being for nonprofits, and we're not a nonprofit. We're actually a corporation, a small corporation, but we are. So I think eventually that's going to have to go to the wayside too. So I'm open to suggestions. I don't know. We're looking for some kind of like member community support thing. We tried doing it through the website. People didn't trust it because it was through the website. Nobody cares about Subscribestar. Does anybody use locals? I think if you're on Rumble, I don't know. Throw some alternatives in the comments here. I'm kind of curious. I mean, not just for us, but for other people. But it's looking like this is going to definitely deal a blow toward Patreon, which was already on shaky ground with a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. And now I really got to rethink it. I'm going to wrap it up. Please subscribe. We'll talk later.